بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. All right. So our guest today is another one of my cousins and the wife of Khizr Hussein, who was on last week. Her name is Zuleqa Hussein, and she is a journalist, among other things. I sent your bio out to the group, so they've all read that. So yeah, we're gonna just kind of explore what you do and then some of how you got here. And the idea here is to expose these young people who are some in high school, some in early stages of college, making those decisions for what they want to do. And so we've been exploring, I think we've gone through maybe 10 or so interviews with different kinds of people in different careers. And yeah, I just want them to be exposed to it. They kind of hear the life story and how people got into what they do and what good things they did, what mistakes they might have made, and how they can learn from other people's experience.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sounds like a great idea.
But tell us, what do you do? You work for Al-Jazeera. What's your job there?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thanks so much, Rizwan Bhai, for hosting this gathering. I really like always talking to young kids, young minds. But would you mind if we start first with all y'all? Like, what stage are you at? What are you doing right now? What are you thinking about, excited about? So that I know a little bit about who I'm speaking with, so we can speak to your particular interests.
So you all jump in.
If you could just
raise your hands or just jump in with Mike.
Start out with a short introduction.
Yeah. Asya, we'll start with the camera people. Asya, why don't you start?
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Asya. I'm second year at Northwestern, and I'm inshallah planning to study creative writing, and as well as like Arabic. Maybe that would expand to like Middle East, North African studies.
Yeah.
I'm a freshman at Northwestern studying political science and economics.
Ahmed?
Assalamu alaikum, my name is Ahmed. I'm an 8th grader at St. Augustine's of Canterbury, New Jersey, and I'm looking to be a lawyer.
A lawyer, yeah. So he's on the younger, I think he's probably the youngest that we have here. Muhammad Chawla?
Assalamu alaikum, my name is Muhammad Chawla. I am a freshman at Howard University, majoring in chemistry, minoring in computer science.
Okay. At Harvard or Howard? What did you say?
Howard University, Washington, D.C.
Howard, okay. Yeah. And Adra?
Assalamu alaikum. I'm a junior in high school and I'm interested in being like a kindergarten teacher.
Yeah. Musa?
I'm a second year at George Mason University as a biology student. I'm hoping to be a dentist.
Oh.
Excellent.
Hassan?
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Hassan. Next year, I'm going into software engineering at Western University in London, Ontario.
Very cool.
And those of you who are on just audio, you can just jump in if you want. I won't go through all your names. Okay, I'll call you Zain.
Oh, sorry.
Who's there? Go ahead. Who joins?
Asya.
Yeah, Asya, go ahead.
I am currently on a gap year, but I'm going to be starting my first year at community college this fall, and I plan to major in exercise science.
Exercise science. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Is that like a physical therapy?
Yeah, like kinesiology.
Kinesiology.
Yeah, kinesiology. Okay, good. Ahmed, is your brother doing something like that as well? Mehdi?
Yeah, he is. He got his certificate to be a personal trainer, but he took like a course to do it, and he had like interest for it previously, and then he went to TCNJ, I think, to do like biomedical engineering something, and then he's going back to do exercise science like Asya.
Okay, good. And who else? Zain Labedin?
Assalamu alaikum. I'm sorry if there's a little bit of background noise. I am currently enrolled in community college at Nova in Virginia. My major is undecided. I'm currently taking my general education courses.
Okay. I think we got most everyone. So there are a lot of people from your area. So you all are in the same in the
know.
Virginia area. I don't know if you have crossed paths with Zuleqa or not.
Not.
But you have Sheikh Chola's Sheikh Muhammad Muslim Chola's son and Sayyid Sulaiman's son, and then three of my children. Yeah. All right.
Very cool, very cool. And I think does Sajida want to go?
Is that Ahmed? Is your mother on? So Sajida,
that's
you're
my
free
mom.
to if you want to speak up as well.
Sorry, I was just trying to figure out how to unmute. I'm just observing with Ahmed so we can converse about these, but I'm actually doing my master's in social work. Alhamdulillah, I'm in my last year. I went back to school after almost 2 decades. Alhamdulillah.
Yeah, alhamdulillah.
Nice.
All right.
All right. So I work as a TV producer for Al-Jazeera. It's a journalist job. I've been there for 12 years now, and I'll kind of back into it so I don't like tell my entire life story. Clearly I'm a storyteller, so I will continue talking until someone stops me.
The life story, actually, I think it would be good. I've gotten some feedback from some of the kids that the life story kind of helps to them to see, I don't know, all the ups and downs and sideways and how you kind of end up where you got to. Is that everyone's sense? I've got some feedback from some of you. Yeah, so tell us that. And she grew up in Mecca, which is always an amazing thing.
Yeah.
I remember my mother called you all up one time to wish you Eid Mubarak, and your father said, "Yeah, we just came back from a picnic in the Haram," and it was so amazing that you would, yeah.
I still dream in Haram. Like I'm always like running around, but I'm just playing in like somewhere around the Kaaba, and I get up. I'm like, man, I cannot be like real life all the time. Alhamdulillah. So I grew up mostly in during my childhood was in Mecca, which is where my father worked. But we went to Indian schools and then went back to India to finish high school, college. I got into medicine like all good Muslim girls from India. That's what you do. But then it was just not something that I was really into. It's like if you're good at science, then that's what you end up in. But when I got married and moved to the United States 2 months before 9/11, and really 9/11 is what changed my course, my path. At first,
How so?
Yeah, and I'll get into that. Basically, I decided I wasn't going to continue medicine. So I finished my undergrad with a with a degree in marketing, a Bachelor of Business. But because 9/11 had happened right then, I decided that the first and foremost thing to do was to join some sort of a Muslim American advocacy organization. Clearly, I took my US citizenship very seriously. As soon as I was like, we have to fix this problem. American Muslims aren't going to be able to resolve it until all of us are right in the thick of it, trying to, and I was 21, figuring out my own Muslim identity, as well as now a US citizenship, which changes kind of your responsibility as a citizen of this world, right? You're not just a citizen of a country, you're a citizen of the United States. So obviously it wields a lot more power around the world. And so you're beholden to keep up the ideals of the Constitution. And or so at that time, I was like, no, this is what we have to do. So of course, I became very much a spokesperson for the American Muslim community. Anything's happening, we're the firefighters out there trying to tell the story of what American Muslims are, who they are, what is Islam, why is Islam not what the terrorists think it is. So that was sort of my, and then within like a couple of years of doing this work, I was like, this makes no sense. Nobody's listening to us. Nobody's listening to what we are saying because we're not on the other side of the mic telling the story. We're just the reactionary voices that are being co-opted. Our stories are never going to be told if we're not on the side of the camera telling this narrative. So I decided immediately to go and do my master's in international media, which is like a joint degree between the School of International Affairs and School of Journalism. So you do your journalism degree, but if you just did a journalism degree, you'd be a CNN, Fox News type of person who's very US centric. That's kind of how journalism is taught in this country. It's like very much like, here's how you create a headline because you're a Western Eurocentric perspective of the global North. So if you took an international affairs classes along with it, international media policy, what does that look like? How is the US hegemony in international media? You kind of get a sense of, wait a minute, that's Western storytelling isn't what the real story is, you know? So you get I got like that kind of a double 2-year degree experience in my master's. And that's really what prompted me to, from the get-go, decide that Al-Jazeera was going to be the network for me. My senior thesis was on this topic, on Al-Jazeera, as it was just starting to make waves and kind of become a big player. My aim was to get a job there. And I did. Alhamdulillah. It has served me well. Alhamdulillah. It really like brought together my colleagues, which kind of felt to me as like, and I still does, it's like a UN of international reporters that are kind of trying to tell the story about the world. Everyone very conscious of the fact that whether we are from America or from outside of America, that there is a kind of Western storytelling at play, and we need to constantly fight that. So that's a very different perspective. And despite not being able to broadcast on cable in the US, we still have like over 300 million followers worldwide, biggest channel in all of Africa, all of MENA, Middle East and North Africa. And right when Arab Spring happened is when we decided that we were going to start a new social media talk show, the only live show on Al Jazeera, where it was like a new concept of like, we will do citizen journalism, bringing people who are actually telling stories on these new platforms like Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. And so our first day, I think, when we went live was the day we heard the news of bin Laden being killed. 2nd April, 2011. And we were like, we had no idea that the day we were going to go live, this would happen. And then of course, everyone's like scrambling for the story. And because we are doing citizen journalism, we're reaching out to people on Twitter. Nobody's thinking, oh, let's get that guy on Twitter on air. And so here we are, the guy who's tweeting from Hyderabad that, oh my God, I just saw a helicopter. This is crazy. Some Pakistani kid in Hyderabad. Next thing you know, we have him on air live. And he's giving us reports that no journalist has even managed to go to. CNN's like caught left-footed. BBC has no idea what's happening. And Al Jazeera is like, okay, we're live from Hyderabad. So that kind of like just changed the course of not just the way news was going to be told in the future, but how we understand kind of the shift in power on who's telling the story. Suddenly, the random person on the street who's protesting something like an oil spill in Ecuador is getting the same platform to be on air with the ambassador from Ecuador to the United States. And we're bringing them on air together to speak to each other. And everyone's like, wait, what? So alhamdulillah, it was a very exciting time. Arab Spring was happening. We were giving like the Bahraini Shia protester on the ground an opportunity to speak with the Bahraini administration here, discussing what's happening, or like, climate change activists getting a chance to speak to UN representatives. And those kinds of discussions sort of created like a new wave. Of course, it starts out that way, and then like the people in power then adjust themselves to be like, wait, we can't let this happen. So then lots of iterations happened, and then, as you know, like now Twitter is also dying a slow death because Elon Musk decided that he wants to own it. So of course, over time then things kind of petered out a little bit. Now it's just a more of a current affairs news talk show. We still go live thrice a week, 3:30 p.m. now, if you guys ever want to take a look at Al-Jazeera Live. We're probably the only channel without any paywall, so you can watch it for free. But that's Al-Jazeera.
So this was this way, what you call it, citizen journalism. This is something that you all kind of initiated, or you kind of fell into and kind of made, or this is something that was happening by, other people were also doing it. And
we were one of the early adopters, early starters of bringing something like this to live TV, because nobody would ever put this up live, right? Like you can't have some guy, like when we had the Maldives ambassador to the United States come on air, not Maldives, Mali. And he was like, there's a coup happening in my country. This is ridiculous. And then he was on air. He's like, I resign right now. This is what's happening. Like, and we were all like, what? All kinds of big news was happening as it was happening, because you were seeing it live and nobody else. Like now that like there's, for example, for whatever happened on our show, our journalist or our office in Iran gets shut down because of that, or our reporter in Saudi Arabia gets kicked out for something that we said, or our journalist in Egypt gets jailed because our show said something on live TV that they didn't like. So now everything's a lot more like they try, most channels, BBC, CNN, they're all trying to like, let's pre-produce it so that we can censor something if we need to, but to not be able to censor and be able to give people live news as what's happening and authentic voices, and it's not like political punditry. There was like this need for it, and I think that kind of giving voice to the voiceless or those who are deliberately silenced is something that is kind of central core to Jazeera and to what I understand to be journalism, and kind of what I felt when that first time I, as an American Muslim, felt like my voice wasn't getting heard, is when I decided to go behind the camera.
wow. Any questions so far on what she's talked about, Ahmed?
During like the first times in COVID, was it like the first couple months, like from maybe February or March all the way to like September or August, did you have like a lot of stories to tell, especially like kids in Syria, kids in Iraq having malnutrition? Was that like a big front of what you guys were talking about during like your talk show during that time?
During COVID, you said?
Yeah.
What were the stories that we were telling? Every day was a Q&A about COVID, because there were so many people around the world. Because if we are bringing in Anthony Fauci or someone who is an expert, we would just bring like a bunch of doctors, different kinds of specialties, or different kinds of people in management, to be like, just we don't have any show topic. It's just COVID. Whatever your questions, we want to answer them. And so it was, people were just like, we have so many questions, right? Everybody had thousands of questions. So I think like a whole 2 months, we just did like a Q&A format. And I think that was really helpful. Of course, after that, it was like people started to actually report on things. And then that meant, okay, there are people out there who can share stories. And then we would bring them to share like how is COVID affecting this country or this group of people, or so those were but really, honestly, during COVID, everyone was struggling. We were struggling to be able to bring something to air. Everyone was working off of their laptops at home. So nobody had a way of creating a studio all at once. And so we tried to like zoom our TV shows out, just like you probably saw Trevor Noah doing from The Daily Show, or everybody, we were like, let's figure out how this weird light can become a studio light. And it was just, everybody was trying to do all kinds of MacGyver.
These guys, they won't know what MacGyver is. I'm sure.
Nobody knows what MacGyver is.
That was a TV show from way before your time.
Hmm.
Musa, you know what MacGyver is?
It's
What's your
the
question?
new iteration is so bad, Rizwan Bhai, that they probably.
Oh, they've redone it?
so
I haven't
bad.
seen the redo.
It's horrifying. Don't watch it.
It's right up my alley.
Uh-huh.
Musa, you give me faith.
Musa, you have a question?
So I actually had two questions, as if we have time to go over them both. These are both questions I had actually also asked from Leila Fadel and wanted to know if it's the same for a it's not a governmental news agency, as well as it's more focused on the Middle East. So I wanted to know, how do you stay neutral or account for biases in both the interviewer or the article writer, and ensure that whatever you're publishing is neutral? You mentioned how some of your offices were either shut down or expelled, and your Egypt reporter or Egyptian reporter was jailed. So how do you stay neutral or manage to publish those stories while also accounting for those risks?
Right. So risk management is of course something that we take very seriously, right? Like if we have a journalist who could be tortured for a story we're doing, it doesn't matter how badly we want to tell a story, we will we will self-censor if that's more accurate. Actually, we will not do, like, sometimes I will want to do a story, I was like, oh my god, we have to do the story out of Egypt. We will get an order from higher up saying, no, right now it's very sensitive, our man could be tortured, we will hold the story. Like, for example, the Hazara community was attacked in Pakistan. We did a full story, brought, voices from Ahl Sunnat wal Jama'at, and we brought voices from the Shia community who was actively trying to push for rights in Pakistan. And it was a very, we were able to do the story. And then when in certain Arab nations, Sunni Shia tensions rose, like in Lebanon, then regardless of what the topic is, they will make sure that, it's probably not the best time right now to do a Sunni Shia story, even if it's a happy story, because sectarian issues could get tense. So they do look at those kinds of issues. As much as people think that, Al Jazeera just doesn't cover stories out of Qatar. I mean, we saw how many stories Al Jazeera was doing about human rights issues and all those things during the World Cup. So it's not, I mean, as much as people keep harping about that, it's really, I mean, Al Jazeera's top brass, the folks that founded the organization, were all ex-BBC folks. BBC had a huge office that they were trying to grow, but last minute got axed. And so there were all this talent in Qatar at the time. And so the Qatari Emir decided, hey, why don't we just create our own channel and then have all these people? So that's why most of like the best of the BBC folks are the ones that kind of started Al Jazeera. And the entire editorial manifesto is based exactly off of the same setup, same manifesto that the BBC has, which is, we will be free from any editorial involvement from the government of Qatar, but is still officially funded from Qatar government, just like the BBC. It's like money is provided so that it is like a public service, but there is not as much, not any editorial overlap, editorial censorship. But as you said, when it comes to, for example, Qatar is being directly affected by the blockade from Saudi Arabia and UAE. That's the time when you will see, like, okay, they were reporting a little too strongly on Saudi Arabia. But it wasn't out of like, oh, this is not a story that is falsely claiming something. You will get a timing difference. Oh, Erdogan is really the president of Turkey, for example, has been multiple times attacked by a certain, Qatari Emir. Okay, at this time, maybe we won't run this particular story, we'll run it a month later. So that's the kind of challenges that I see at my workplace when it comes to regional issues. But when it comes to stories like, oh, how many items has the British Museum stolen from colonized countries? We do a show almost every month on that. It's like Jazeera's favorite topic.
If it's all right, I can ask my follow-up question.
It's funny that because like when we talk about the UN, like we literally have on our team is probably one of the largest in terms of programs. Like for example, Mehdi Hassan's show from back in the day, Head to Head or Upfront, they have a much smaller team because it's a pre-produced show, right? You don't need as many people if you're not going live. Live requires like a whole big team. And so our team would have a person from like all over the map, right? Australia, many countries in Europe, many countries in Africa, many countries in Asia. And it just so happened though that I don't think I've ever worked with a colleague whose country was not colonized by the British. That's something we all have in common. How crazy is that, right? Like, how far do you have to go before you run into someone who was never colonized by the British?
Well, our guest from last week, Ali Asghar, has the answer to that. They've never been colonized before. He was British. I think he's Indian British, but he identified with Britain more than India, I guess. Yeah,
Sorry, you
Hassan?
had a question, I think, and I interrupted you.
Yeah, no, it's no problem. My follow-up question was about verifying information. Like, because you said you specialized in like citizen journalism. So I was wondering how you, vet the information or vet the tweets or the posts on other social media platforms for either for truth or how you account for them possibly being made up or whatever.
Sure. Yeah, that's one of the big challenges when you use Twitter and Instagram, right? You have to, for any retweet, for anything that you're going to take to air, you have to make sure that at least two very, very reputable sources have also said that. So most of our fact checking still goes through the traditional routes of actually going to the source or going to Reuters, because you're going to get the first-hand information, whether in terms of news or if you're going to the source for like actual, okay, this is a study done by, let's see who did the study. Let's talk to them directly to see if this is what they actually claim. Or to the government representative who said that statement, for example. I mean, you get so much of propaganda, so much of fake videos, like deep fake videos out there, so that any video or picture is really not something that you could take to air and say, okay, this is real. So our team, surprisingly, I mean, plus we have like 3 or 4 different sets of eyes to edit something before we take it to air, because once we do, we haven't had many times that we've actually had to make corrections. So
Ahmed, what's your question?
This is definitely a big issue. Did I actually my first answer make sense in terms of like the question that you were specifically asking about staying neutral? Because I mean, I think staying neutral, one of the big questions that we get, and I also worked for Voice of America before I joined Al-Jazeera. So that would be a very good comparison if you guys ever wanted to, in terms of like where Al-Jazeera is coming from with its news and where Voice of America is or was created by the United States State Department as a very specific propaganda news arm during the Cold War, right? So that was...
Can I ask, why did you join Voice of America with that kind of background that you're talking about with 9/11 and all of that?
Yeah, it was, they had come in for one of the interviews, and I was talking to one of their team members, but it was an Urdu service reporter who was reporting straight to Pakistan. So Voice of America didn't have necessarily regional departments. They have language-based departments. So for example, their Pashto service goes to Afghanistan as well as other areas that speak Pashto, or their Urdu service goes to Pakistan mostly, but also some places in India. Similarly with their Farsi service goes to, so they have, because they started out as a propaganda arm for the United States State Department. It's under the State Department, so they can their manifesto, United States does not allow any publicly funded U.S. U.S. government funded media to ever broadcast inside the United States, which is such a great thing, because then no time shall a U.S. government administration use media against its own people.
Well, what is NPR then? Isn't NPR government funded?
No, I mean, no, not government. It's public money.
Oh, like donations, contributions for listeners.
By citizens, not from the government.
Mm-hmm.
But United States State Department officially funds the entirety of Voice of America. So Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, all of the, to counter the Russian propaganda. So for example, within Russia, it was all state-run media, right? So when Chernobyl disaster happens, they're not telling their public anything about what's happening in the country. Nobody knows what kinds of horrifying things the Russians are doing, because their people don't know, and nothing is coming to them from the state government. So the United States never wanted that to happen to their country. So that's why they have this limitation. So, but Urdu service is broadcasting to, currently, out of all the channels around the world, networks around the world, United States Voice of America has the largest number of dedicated satellites. They have 7 satellites around the world. One whole satellite just dedicated to Iran. Because
did you feel ethical, like, knowing all of this? How did you?
So when I first,
how did you join, or did you not realize this until after?
Here's what my concern was Urdu. The entirety of my interest when I first decided to move towards media was how do I make my first in? So when I first, I was doing this interview because they needed an Urdu speaker, American Muslim Urdu speaker, to talk about how are American Muslims dealing with post 9/11, all these issues. Pakistan wants to know. So let's interview someone who can speak Urdu. So then they came to me and I was giving them the interview, and I was like, you're going to tell the story, but like, how do you work? What is it that you do in this media? And they were like, yeah, I was like, are you hiring? And because I just wanted to see what it was like to be working for a media organization. And they gave me an opportunity. So I took it. And then I started to broadcast to, because they had just started an Urdu TV. I don't know if you guys know of Geo TV. It broadcasts to Pakistan. It's one of the channels in Pakistan. So we were having a whole half-hour news segment that showed stories about America. By then, the propaganda part of the Voice of America had obviously lessened a lot more. So Cold War is not happening. There's no actual like big wars happening at that time. So they were like, whatever stories, good stories about what life is like in the United States, you can share. So it was like more human interest pieces. Oh, there's a really cool Pakistani American that's doing cool things. Let's interview them. Oh, United States is going through its election cycle. What does that look like in a democracy in America? How does America work? So it's mostly stories, very general, nothing too controversial, is what the kind of stories were that we were doing for them. But it was just like a kind of dip into, for me, like I did that for a year. to see what it was like. But even then, it was interesting because I was the only hijabi, like Indian, working in the Pakistani team. And for me, it was very interesting to see because we were given stories from the Voice of America news desk, and they said, oh, these are kind of stories that you can write in Urdu and share with the audience in Pakistan. And the letters that we would get from Pakistan would be like, how are you wearing a hijab? Because this was right after 9/11, right? For them, it's like, oh God, what's going on? How is a hijabi out on the street? Aren't you being attacked? And I was like, so it's interesting because there's been Muslims living in this country since like 50s, 60s, 70s, but only after 9/11, suddenly everyone's eyes were on American Muslims. So it was kind of like that, oh, what does it feel like to be on this side telling the story now? But I did that for just a year, and I realized, okay, clearly this is definitely my path, and I should go back to school, study journalism so that I can actually do this job well. So it was kind of just 1 year to see what life would be like as a journalist. And I think that's always helpful. Like once you do your undergraduate degree, to go straight into some sort of a working environment, whatever field you may be, whether it's creative writing, whether it's biomedical engineering, or any field, right? That you should just get into some sort of a work, whether even if you start out as I started out as an internship that converted into like a associate producer job, basically at the bottom rung, but you do it for a little bit and then you're like, oh yeah, this definitely feels like something I should get my master's in or something like that. And that really puts you in a good place after you've then focused yourself to get a good job.
Ahmed?
We talked about like how you were fearful like for doing like a story about Egypt that was bad because like you had like someone in jail in Egypt. But I mean, this country's not always 100% safe. So did you ever worry about like doing a story about this country that might not always be as positive, and you or your family being attacked, or someone waiting outside your house, or something like that?
Alhamdulillah, right? After all is said and done, US is not like Egypt, and you still don't have to worry about stuff like that necessarily. Al-Jazeera, in its initial days, we had to keep our location kind of not fully advertised. So our buildings never have a, hey, here's Al-Jazeera in Washington, DC. We're the North America headquarters we have 4 headquarters around the world, and we're the North America headquarters. We don't, because we did get a bomb threat in 2017, a year after launch. So, and then we got another threat like 3 months ago. But since we've since moved. So that does happen very infrequently. I mean, it's been like 2 or 3 times, but not from, it'll be some really, really extreme situation. It's never been a situation where, here in the US, we've been attacked for telling a story, either a US-based story or anywhere else. I think it's relatively much more peaceful for us. But for our field reporters who are doing a story whether it's out of Iran, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Egypt, Somalia, where we have a huge terrorist population, unfortunately. Those are places we still have to be very careful.
How did you deal with those threats? Like you said, you got one like 3 months ago. How do you deal with something like that? Because that's like scary. I mean, like if I was working in a workplace and we got a bomb threat, I mean, I'd be scared out of my life. You know what I mean? So
yeah, no, definitely. It's they do create like a highly secured building setup. They make sure that everyone's taken care of. I think that threat was not as big because we had been going through so many COVID scares. the COVID scares, where I think folks had, I think, gotten much more worried about that in the past 2 years of having to deal with that. So this was comparatively like not as crazy.
Can we go back to what you were saying earlier? Like, I think one of the challenges for people in this age group is they know some of their talents, but they're still largely untapped or like raw. Probably like they've been exposed to some things and maybe they like some subject or like some activity or something like that. But trying to actually get all of that geared towards a particular career and say like this is what I want, or this is what I can do really well, or this is what I love and I could devote a lifetime to it. It's quite challenging. So it sounded like you kind of, the circumstance of that 9/11 and maybe some of your background, like everything kind of came together. Was it just an aha moment for you, or I don't know, is there guidance you can derive from that can be more like generally applicable, or no, you just had your own personal like aha moment and it ended up being what you loved?
No, you're right. I mean, there is definitely like one general thing that I've seen over the course of the last 12 years is that my development as, here's the skills that I really think work for me, or others see in me and say, oh, that you're really good at this, is like storytelling. Whether it's like sitting and talking about my family stories, or like history of Islam stories, just telling stories that will really engage someone. Whether it's, I mean, I'm obviously very much a verbal storytelling person. People who are really good at creative writing or telling stories through words on a paper, for them, I think clearly, if you want to make a living out of this, journalism is a really great option, right? Because you get, for me, I mean, if I was, I'm sure there are folks who love storytelling in a way that they want to make a 3-hour movie, right? Or a 2-hour documentary about something. And there are people on our team who've won Emmys, Fault Lines for Leila Alarian. I don't know if you know her. She's a really amazing journalist with Al-Jazeera who's won a number of Emmy Awards. And that's great for them. I am not someone who would ever make a 2-hour documentary. It would take the life out of me. I'm all about like short stories. Here's the current affairs news story this week. Here's what's happening next week. And I move from story to story. And because for me, that is what my passion is, to be able to like really like speak to deadlines, talk about this story, get really deep into it, and then move on to the next one. So it's kind of like what your working style is. You slowly understand that. Maybe you understand that through your bachelor's degree. Maybe it takes you a little bit longer. But what really is your passion? You know how they always do what your passion is. It's like, when I was young, I was like, I'm good at science. I'm good at math. I'm good at English. Like, whatever I study, I can work on this. So I don't know what my passion is, because it's not good. It's hard to focus at that time, because you're like, I'm able to do all of these things. So I think what eventually happens is that you realize, oh, this is something that you love so much, or you do so much, that everybody kind of remembers you that way. And they're like, oh, that must be what my interest really is. And that's how I ended up doing family reunions, because I love telling family stories, or how I ended up doing being like best friends with all the grandmas in the room, because they love telling stories. I love listening to stories, and then I go and tell all those stories to my younger cousins, and they're like, what? I never knew about this.
So are those things that you understood about yourself even before you got into journalism, or like it's kind of gone hand in hand as you became a journalist and you tapped into that more in yourself?
Because when I first decided I didn't want to do medicine, it was very hard. It was very hard for me to figure out what is it then that I do want to do. And I chose marketing out of all of those fields that I researched, because marketing was a way of telling the story. Except, oh, heck, I did not want to dive into American capitalism. It was like the worst thing for me to realize marketing, as you read more into it. I ended up doing my degree in marketing, but the part that attracted me were the ads. So the advertising part, I was like, oh, this is cool, creative ways of telling a story. But then marketing is really just psychology, like American psychology at its best, trying to sell you capitalism, like selling you capitalism. And
Wait, so you got sucked into marketing by the ads about marketing?
by the ads actually in India, the Indian advertising world is magical. Sorry. It's almost as good as Bollywood. Like if you want short Bollywood stories in 30 seconds, it's Indian ads. I mean, I can still write a whole I've written a paper about it actually when I was in school, and I can still talk about Indian advertising. It's so brilliant. But yeah, it's a different way of telling a story, if only you weren't selling stuff.
So journalism seems like a very taxing job. Usually, like maybe the ones who are writing print and having to go on site. Is your job like that, where you're probably not traveling as much?
I am not doing the field reporting, which is what I was saying is like, definitely the taxing thing.
So is there good work-life balance with what you do?
Especially these days, as a field reporter, with someone who has a good iPhone, you're kind of like stuck doing cameraman, writer, producer, director, all of it for your story. So if you can't do all 5 things and juggle at the same time, really it's hard to find a job right now. Field reporting is hard. So anyone who's doing like programs like a talk show, which is what I do, gets to stay at home in one place and then make phone calls and go on social media, and I'm able to tell the story through others. So it's definitely a better work-life balance. And then with this COVID situation, work from home has kind of become like the norm now. So we only go in when we have to run the studio.
And is your job does it have regular hours, like business hours, or how does that work?
I work on getting the right voices on the show. So of course, if it's a talk show, it's based on guests. And if you can get the right guests, then it's a good show. If you don't get the right guests, it's not a good show. So if my story is out of China, then I'm working at 3 a.m. If my story is out of France, then I'm working at 4 a.m. Whatever is the time frame that they're in, depending on the guest availability. So I work around it. If I'm working a night, then I'll sleep in the morning. So, but it's still relatively easier than being in the field. Because when imagine if you're thinking field, our reporter on the Mexican border, if there's a caravan that he's following, he's literally on the border with the caravan walking alongside. Or if it's a refugee story out of boat, then he's on the boat trying to get to the story and the people.
How is income in your field, or in like kind of your workspace? If you were the single income or single breadwinner in your family, would you be able to kind of support family with what you do, or no? The kids have been asking this about different careers, so I thought rather than asking afterwards, I'll ask you now.
That's a good question. Al-Jazeera, because when they first started, they knew that it was going to be hard to get journalists to jump ship from others and come to an Arab network. So they did start off with really good pays. They have not since done any cost of living increases. So we ended up having to form unions 3 years ago. Both the London Bureau and the US Bureau created unions. and negotiated some raises and cost of living increases and so forth. So I think people are in a good place now, but it was at a time, a little bit tricky, because if you're in Doha, which is the headquarters in Qatar, then their pays are much better. For them, if it's DC or London, you're already living in a nation that is, according to them, much more has better infrastructure, better lifestyle, and so their pay was like, we don't need to increase it, you'll be fine. So I think when you're asking like single income, could you survive as a family? Yes, alhamdulillah. Here in the US market, if you're going into media and you're obviously starting as at a local channel, local NPR station or local TV station, CNN, MSNBC, not as good of a pay. Fox News is probably your best shot. And I'm not talking about the Fox News network that's national, because that's the one we have problems with, right? Most everyone here. But the Fox News local services aren't actually that biased or extreme. You'd be surprised. But Fox News does a better pay. They have the best quality in terms of the broadcast quality. So interestingly, at American University, where I did my master's degree, my journalism professor was ex-Fox News professor. She had done 5 years at Fox, and then she was teaching at American. So we were like, what? American University is known to be a very liberal left-wing school. So we were like, how is a Fox News producer, how did she make it here? There was a disconnect. And she explained that you start at Fox because they have the best pay and they will teach you the best skills to be a good broadcast TV journalist. So that's why I did that for 5 years. But then you can only take their content for that long, and then you're like, get me out of here. So she did, and then she taught for a little bit. Now she's able to get any job she wants because she has all the really good skill sets. So they're really good about production. That's why people watch it, right? Like red states will be like, we only watch Fox News because they do a good job of selling news.
We're almost just about done. Any advice? Are you giving some advice? I think about like they need to know themselves, and that might take experience and internships and jobs and different things before they start to realize kind of who they are, what they are. Any other advice that you have for young people in search of career?
Don't sell yourself short during internships. Everyone feels like, oh, I'm doing an internship. Oh, these guys are doing such a great favor to me by giving me this internship, and I'm getting all this opportunities to learn. No, internships are where you really can kind of set a mark. You can really show them that not only are you well worth getting this internship, that they should actually also be paying you a stipend during the internships. Like, people have been abusing employees have been abusing the whole internship concept so much, but it's kind of like amazing how much even on our team, and we pay our interns, how much work the interns actually do. So like, I think internships are like a great place for you to like not just learn all these amazing skills, but also set your mark. Like, I did 2 internships during my master's at Al-Jazeera, and I was like, it doesn't matter. Like, you guys are giving me this job as soon as I graduate. I've been here 2 internships and I'm not going anywhere. So it's like you can be you can be negotiating during your internship. So always make use of that. It's not just like, oh, we've given you this opportunity to learn. Now you can just go. You're done. if that is where you want to be, you know.
Yeah. So I guess
But
internships are a good way to also explore, right? Because you can do different things, kind of dabble in things over summer or a few months, and that way, the more you expose yourself to different kinds of life careers, then you get to know more about those jobs, and then whether there's resonance between yourself and your own skills and those fields.
Do you guys know about MPSN, like the Muslim Public Service Network?
I haven't heard of it. Anyone?
It's a program based here in Washington, D.C., where if you are interested in any kind of opportunities in DC, like during summer internships, summer jobs, they will help place you. I think you have to go through an application process, but it's a group of folks who have enough contacts in the DC area, whether it's political internships or media internships or policy think tank internships or lobbyists. There's the whole K Street is like a big lobbyist internships, any kind of internships that are more DC based. And there are availabilities for hard sciences, you know, like the US Patent Office has internships for biomedical engineers or those studying biomedical engineering. And that is also based in Northern Virginia. So, but mostly like the DC area based, and they have a house here where they provide housing during the summer for those folks who are interested in. And along with that, it's kind of like a cohort. Everyone's doing their internship during the whole summer, but then during the weekends, they'll have like programs where they'll invite like big speakers from the DC area or abroad or outside of the area. They'll come give talks, and you kind of create this camaraderie. It was quite a thing when I was finishing up school and those few years, but then it died down. Now it's back up. So I just heard recently that the whole program is back in action, and it's a really good way to kind of, if you wanted to do a DC internship. I know that there's at least three people here who are already in the DMV area.
So you said MPSM.
Muslim Public Service Network.
Oh, N is the last one. MPSN. Okay. Great.
And then if anyone's like interested in State Department related internships, you know, Sarah Shabir, she can definitely connect you to that.
Right.
Those are good options. But do you have any questions, any other questions that are maybe I spoke too long about just journalism, and if you wanted to ask any other side questions.
Ahmed, you have a question?
Yeah, so I was just wondering, I don't know if you said this earlier, but I'm gonna be able to take in high school a journalism class. So I think there's two levels. There's journalism and advanced journalism. Yeah, there's journalism and advanced journalism. Will that be like, and I think advanced journalism would be more like a college level course. Do they in college, when they teach you journalism, do they teach you more of an American side of point? Do they teach you more of a how to get the facts and get it straight, uncensored, nothing in between?
American journalism. So there's two different kinds of journalism courses that you'll see. One is like the skills based, right? So it's like, okay, how do you do a broadcast for a TV station? Or how do you actually write a story? What's the headline? What is the lead? What is the da-da-da-da? And like the actual steps of writing a story, whether it's you're writing it for New York Times or you're writing it for some other local Indian network. So those are very skill based, and there's no American or Indian or Ethiopian journalism there. That's everybody's going to do the same thing. But if you're asking about what does it take to put together a story as a foreign correspondent versus as a local news writer for WBR Boston.
I think he's asking about like the bias that's there in like the bias that, you know, people perceive that you're this leaning this way or that way, or kind of pro country or ideology, those kinds of things. How do you maybe sort those things out? Is that, Ahmed, what you're talking about? besides the skill?
It might depend on your teacher also. So if the teacher is like a very US centric, we did have someone who was like a very US centric, like, oh, people don't really understand. So they actually teach you how to write for a US audience versus you're writing as a foreign correspondent for New York Times. So if I'm writing as a foreign correspondent for New York Times, I'm doing the story facts based, nothing in them. But if I'm writing a story for my local audience in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, then, oh, India is, 10 times the size of, pick a US state or something like that. You have to give them like a US centric example, otherwise they won't get it. You can't talk in metric, you have to talk in like inches and miles. So those are like the very US versus outside. But nobody in journalism classes should be or is talking about like, oh, well, when you're talking about Israel, you should talk about it this way, or when you talk about Palestine, you should talk about it this way, because those kinds of biases show up automatically based on who is writing a story, and it's up to us to check that and call it out. That's all we can do at this point. That's what we do at Jazeera. Even though our biggest bias that we keep getting from folks is that we are very Palestine focused. And if you go to Al-Jazeera Arabic News, which was the first network that started, and then Al-Jazeera English was the second sister network that was created, right? Al-Jazeera Arabic has been there for much longer, and it's a full Arabic network, language network. And they do have a lot more Palestinian reporters. Their Palestinian reporters are more activist, less reporter. Or I shouldn't say that. I should say they're activist reporters, right? And I will be the first one to say that, because as a reporter, you have to make sure that you are not bringing your personal opinion into it. Because so many people around the world, all citizen journalists become that because they have an activist in them. I became a reporter because I have an American Muslim activist in me that called out to be a reporter and tell the story, because nobody else was going to tell it the way I want it to be told. So there's always someone who's out there wanting people to know the truth, is why you would go into journalism, right? But the Israel-Palestine story will constantly be manipulated, and there will constantly be folks who will be checking that. So.
All right. Thank you so much, Zuleqa. This is really great.
I hope I was able to answer some questions. I know that I'm sure Leila Fadl had like so much more insight, and if there were any like follow-ups from that you guys went home and thought about, maybe you could bring those, or if you have any other questions after this discussion, feel free to email me also. That's no problem.
Yeah. No, I think seeing the life story and how people end up where they are, and how they, even that, especially that critical point that I pushed on, like how do you figure it out? I mean, I remember struggling. I think until I went to the Hausa, I didn't really know. Like I kind of went into education because my brother was a teacher, and I was good at biology, so I became a biology teacher. But then I went to the Hausa, and that's when I finally realized that actually, teaching biology is not something that's exclusive to what I can do. I can do something more. I realized for the first time I was a writer. I never knew I was a writer until post college, and now I don't look back to biology. Now everything I do is with language and writing, and things that I never knew I was good at, earlier on.
Yeah.
So just that,
especially those of
understanding
us
how people have gone through all of that is, I think, very helpful.
Yeah, especially those of us who like start out in medicine and then have to figure our way out of it. I feel like
that's been the universal theme. At least every DSC we've had so far, it's always I first went to pre-med, and then there's a post story, and then that's when they found their real calling.
Exactly. But even now, I keep having like a midlife situation where I'm like, oh, maybe I should just, I've done Jazeera for so long. I think 10 of my colleagues have since left. I'm the only like original OG who's still going strong with the stream. And 10 of my colleagues have gone on to other news networks or other programming and won Emmys. I think we were nominated once. We maybe have won a few Webbies back in the day when Webbies were a thing, but you know, so it's like everyone, and for me, I constantly think my next big thing is going to be teaching an Urdu class or becoming an Urdu professor, whichever works. But coming back to my language roots, still storytelling, but through language.
We'll have to do another interview once you get into that career and see how that happened.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And if the kids have more
special
questions,
guest appearance.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I just won this class. That was exactly what I needed. Thank you. Oh my God, mashallah, she's become so cute.
All right. We'll go ahead and close out. And if the kids, if they have questions, then I'll channel them out over to you, and maybe I'll put you in touch with them directly if they want to.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you for all your questions and time.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hafiz.
Khuda
Thank you so
Hafiz.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.